The filmmaker David Lynch was born January 20th, 1946, in Missoula, Montana, and he just passed away 2 days ago before I'm recording this, on January 15th, 2025. David Lynch was a big influence to me, somebody I really admired and looked up to, who's known mainly for his filmmaking, but later on known more for his work with transcendental meditation and bringing meditation to schools. And it was always somebody I looked up to as a sort of bridge between these worlds of sort of dark, deep, mysterious, unique expression and art, but then to be into meditation and mindfulness and spirituality and bridge those two so seamlessly. For myself, my name is Jeremy Devins. This is the Quiet Mind Astrology podcast. And I got really into like horror movies and heavy music and darker stuff, entertainment wise, as a kid. And it seemed very weird to me to get into yoga and meditation. But seeing David Lynch do it made it seem not so weird because he was already a very weird guy. But he kind of normalized this idea of meditation to a world of people who might have thought it was too weird or different or not cool or something. So he was a big inspiration to me. And in this episode, I want to just look back on his life a little bit and through his chart and use his chart as a case study to understand him a little bit more and maybe help you understand yourself a little bit more. Or if you're somebody who also maybe thought his work was interesting or inspiring in some way, you could learn something about that as well. So I'm going to be reading through his bio on Wikipedia and looking at his chart right now. And if you want to follow along with me, you can get his chart. You can just go to my site and look it up, my free chart calculator at quietmindastrology.com. It's January 20th, 1946 at 3 a.m. in Missoula, Montana in the United States. And I'm looking at his Wikipedia page for some dates and information about him. And even if you don't know anything about him, I think you'll find this interesting from like a research perspective and just seeing how I do research on people and hopefully as a way maybe to celebrate his life a little bit. And even if you're not interested in his work or anything like that, that's okay. I know he's pretty out there and unique for a lot of people, but I think there's a lot of deeper meaning in his stuff and a lot of very interesting stuff to discover and rewatching his movies if you haven't before, or just actually checking out his talks about meditation and mindfulness, or his book Catching the Big Fish was also a very big inspiration to me as well. So he was an American filmmaker, visual artist, musician, and actor. Received acclaim for his films, which are often distinguished by their surrealist, dreamlike qualities. In a career spanning more than 50 years, he was awarded numerous accolades, including the Golden Lion for Lifetime Achievement at the Venice Film Festival in 2006 and an honorary Academy Award in 2019. It's often described as a visionary and considered one of the most important filmmakers of his era. And he studied painting before he began making short films in the late 60s. And his first feature length film was the independent surrealist film Eraserhead, which saw success as a midnight movie. He was nominated for Academy Award for Best Director for the biographical drama of The Elephant Man in 1980, and the neo-noir thriller Blue Velvet in 1986, and the surrealist mystery Mulholland Drive in 2001. He won other awards like the Palme d'Or, which is like the biggest award for independent films at the Cannes Film Festival in 1990 for Wild at Heart. He may be most known for his TV show Twin Peaks, which aired in 1990 to 1991, and then came back in 2017. And he's made several other movies that you may have heard of, like Inland Empire and Lost Highway and Dune in 1984, and things like this. All of these movies are pretty unique and surrealistic. So from that, the first thing I want to look at is just where do you see like surrealism in his chart? Well, the first thing I see, if you're looking at his chart, this might be easier to follow along, but I'll try to make it clear if you're not looking at it, so that maybe if you have some of these or you know some of these placements yourself, you can relate to them. So the big thing that stands out to me in his chart is K2 and Mercury conjunct. And usually Mercury is conjunct the sun in a chart. Very common, but sometimes it is away from the sun because Mercury is always very close to the sun. So in most charts, in most charts, Mercury and the sun are conjunct. In some charts, Mercury is in the sign before the sun, and some other charts, Mercury is in the sign after the sun. So Mercury in this case is in the sign before the sun, and it's conjunct K2. K2 is what brings this like detached, spiritual, mystical kind of thing into our lives. It's where we have past life karma and insights and realizations. And when you add Mercury to K2, now it adds this way of communicating that is a bit mystical and a bit detached from the everyday average life. Now, this is in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a sort of adventure seeking energy and very curious kind of energy. But it's also this energy where K2 is where your past life is. And if you focus too much on K2 in your chart, it's kind of like you're going backwards. And in his case, K2 in Sagittarius, his life, he could have focused on all of the sort of adventure and fun and excitement of fame and success that he achieved. But he has Rahu opposite that. So everyone has Rahu opposite of Ketu, and his is in Mrigashira and Gemini. So rather than focusing on adventure and fun and excitement in Ketu, he focuses more on creativity in Gemini, Rahu and Gemini. It's about looking at lots of different options, just endless creativity, very much full of ideas and inspiration intrinsically. And Rahu is where you have this infinite energy and you want to keep feeding that and going in that direction, but not get stuck there. But in his case, having Rahu in Gemini shows up, I think, for him as just being very creative, very innovative, and very unique. Now, the other things for uniqueness and creativity and innovation would be Uranus, which is unique, and Neptune, which is illusion, which he works in cinema and film, which is like a play, like a fantasy, like a story. So his Uranus placement is in Taurus. So unique ways of creating structure, and it's in the eighth house for him. So it's like unique ways of going into the subconscious, the psyche, the understanding of the underworld, the deeper parts of ourselves, the dark side of reality. And so much of his films have this element of like going into things that are mysterious, hidden. Like Twin Peaks starts with a murder of the beauty pageant queen, or like the popular girl in school, and then going into the sort of dark side of that whole town. And that's like Uranus in Taurus in the eighth house. Taurus is in its opposite house, basically. Like Taurus is naturally the second house, but when you put Taurus in the eighth house, now it brings issues of the home, family, and security into the underbelly of society. So I think the show Twin Peaks, which is also a movie too. There's a movie following the series, but it goes into that very much of that part of what's the sort of dark side of this seemingly peaceful, safe, secure little town, but there's some sort of hidden dark side and mystery underneath it all. And it just keeps going deeper and deeper because that's the nature of this placement. And he embodied that very well. And you can feel that in his work. And then the dreamlike part of it, you might think he has got a lot of Pisces placements or something, but nothing's in Pisces. Pisces is ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is in his ascendant, in his first house. So he does have that dreamlike influence on his sense of self and his even his appearance. There's a sort of unique, sort of dreamlike appearance to him a lot of the times, unique hairstyle he's had over the years. And he always wears the same thing, which we'll get to that in a moment. That's part of like Uranus and Taurus too. Taurus is like stability. Uranus is unique, so unique ways of creating stability. But no planets in Pisces. But he does have a lot of Pisces kind of energy with his ascendant ruling Pisces, essentially Jupiter in the ascendant ruling Pisces, and Neptune in the 12th house in Virgo. So again, Virgo is in its opposite sign. And this, what I'm saying about these opposites is true for everybody who's a Libra ascendant, because Libra ascendant is going to flip every sign to be in its opposite house, which is great for Libras to be able to understand lots of different perspectives. And Libra people in general are known for their compromising or balancing or harmonizing ability because of that opposite placement. But when you bring it into art, it brings in this great ability to play with contrast and opposites and light and dark, which David Lynch did amazingly well in his art. And especially for him now having Neptune in Virgo in the 12th house. Neptune's in the dreamy 12th house. Neptune is illusions and fantasies and things that we perceive a certain way, but we're not getting the whole truth. And there's an element even to his films that, with this dreamlike nature, with this unique dialogue and unique settings and scenes and characters, that it's kind of like when you're in a dream and it's things are not fully formed, it's not clear exactly what's happening, or the sequence of events doesn't quite make logical sense. Like Virgo, if it was just pure Virgo energy, would be a very linear, logical story, like maybe something like the typical summer action movie or something, where it's very clear. The plot is very direct, very simple. Uh, Man seeks girl, man gets the girl, whatever. Man fights off a bad guy, superhero, superheroine, whatever. Very direct, like Marvel movies, superhero movies. These are all like very simple, simple stories. But his stories are constantly bending and warping that linear logical path. Things are maybe out of sequence. Words are, it's very dreamlike. But he himself has said that he is not actually making movies based on his dreams. And he basically goes into meditation twice a day for 15 minutes, morning and night. And whatever question he has, he gets the answer there. And that's how he's making his decisions. And he talks about this in his book, Catching the Big Fish, where it's this idea of when you go out fishing, you got to wait. You just got to drop the line and wait. And the longer you wait, the more the line can drop down into the water, and those small fish will pass by. And then eventually the big fish will see that thing and you'll catch it. So, and he uses that as a metaphor for ideas, for creativity, and using the idea that if you sit in meditation longer, you'll get underneath like the more shallow, superficial ideas that you get from reacting to external inputs and social media or whatever modern stuff. And he was saying this before all that, but the idea that you sit there and wait, and then the big ideas will come. So that was his approach, and I think part of that is the Neptune in the 12th house and Virgo. So Virgo is about stability, consistency, structures, routines. The 12th house is meditation. So he's got this ability to consistently meditate, which are actually opposite energies, which is why a lot of people struggle with having a consistent spiritual practice or meditation practice, because those are opposite energies. To consistently, daily, without fail, do something that is about transcending consistency and physicality and daily life is a paradox and a complicated thing to do. So there's lots of reasons people can do it and lots of other placements that can point to that, but this is one of them. Just in general, people having a Libra ascendant puts Virgo into the 12th house. Now, something like that, usually there's going to be multiple reinforcing factors, like he has Sun in Capricorn. And the Sun is where you get your power and vitality. Capricorn is consistency, reliable. Also an earth sign like Virgo. So through being consistent, he finds himself, he feels empowered. Also, having Saturn, Mars, and Rahu all conjunct in Gemini, Saturn brings discipline, consistency. It slows down the Mars energy. It slows down the Gemini and Rahu energies. So it stabilizes them. It's a very interesting combination to have. Whereas if he had Saturn somewhere else, he might be too creative, too off the wall, and not have had the commercial success that he had, which he didn't have like the biggest success in the world, but very well respected, very consistent body of work, very hardworking, put out a lot of stuff in his lifetime, and very reliable in his quality of work over his lifetime. So I think the Saturn part there helps sort of anchor all of that and balance it out inside of Gemini with Mars and Rahu, which are a lot of changing energies. And then he also has Moon in Leo, ruled by the Sun. So that stabilizes his Moon a bit too, and gives him a great position of authority and leadership. Anybody with Moon in Leo tends to excel in their field and be seen as a leader, and people look up to them. And then you add that his moon is in Leo. Leo's ruled by the sun in Capricorn. So that adds this element of more discipline, consistency, staying power. And he's managed to have a very long, consistent career from his first film in 1977 all the way through his end of life. So those are some of the things I see here. Another interesting one is whenever the moon is in the fourth pada of the nakshatra it's in, no matter what nakshatra or what sign, moon in the fourth pada is a good indicator of an old soul, because that ends up meaning that he's born at the end of his dasha he's born in. So he's born near the end of his K2 dasha. And it's just a few more months. In his case, it's actually about 8 months until he starts his next dasha. That's more common that it's going to be years where you're born into a dasha. You stay in that dasha for a few years at least. But when you're in the fourth pada, it means usually a few months. So also being born in the K2 dasha generally gives somebody a sense of detachment. They're a little bit outside the box, a little bit unique. They may even feel like an alien in this world. And he's described things like that in interviews I've heard of him as well. And the old soul energy brings an ability to do something like be a director in his 20s. And again, most directors get involved in that work by their teens and 20s. So that's not super unusual for a director. But to be a director requires a sort of good perception and ability to read other people, a sense of aesthetic and balance. And Libra ascendant helps a lot with that. Jupiter in the first house helps a lot with that, as being the general. Jupiter is often associated with like army generals or people who have a position like a director where they've got to essentially guide the whole system, the whole process of the lighting, the sound, the storyboards, the script. It all comes back to the director being the decision maker. So people with like Jupiter in the ascendant or a strong sun, like Moon in Leo, and then Sun in Capricorn, with that is a great placement for a great leader and somebody who can manage a team and direct traffic and be like a general or a CEO or a boss or a director in some sort of role like this. Now, I'm going to read through a little bit more of his bio. If anything that might stand out is interesting to look at. He says, my childhood was elegant homes, tree-lined streets, the milkman, building backyard forts, droning airplanes, blue skies, picket fences, green grass, cherry trees. Middle America as it's supposed to be. But on the cherry tree, there's this pitch oozing out, some black, some yellow, and millions of red ants crawling all over it. I discovered that if one looks a little closer at this beautiful world, there are always red ants underneath. Because I grew up in a perfect world, other things were a contrast. So I think part of this is his Libra ascendant, Jupiter in the first house. That's generally a sense of protection. Jupiter being placed in anyone's first, fifth, or ninth house is an amazing placement to have because it's then aspecting the first, fifth, and ninth houses. And those are the houses of good fortune, good luck, general sense of being protected in this world. And he having Jupiter in the first house like that definitely adds to this. And then his second house of childhood and home and things like this is Scorpio. Now, you may think Scorpio in the second house may bring more disruption to the childhood, and it certainly can. But in his case, it's Scorpio is ruled by Mars in Punarvasu, and this is Atmakarika. And Mars is with Saturn in Punarvasu, both in Gemini. So the Lord of the second house, the childhood, is in Punarvasu, which is a optimistic energy, a hopeful energy, and Punarvasu nakshatra is ruled by Jupiter. So it's again coming back to this benevolent energy. So having a childhood where there is a dark side, like he says, there are always red ants underneath the beautiful world. That's an awareness of Scorpio. But there is also the beautiful world, which is the Jupiter first house. The second Lord, Mars, is in Punarvasu, which is a very optimistic, helpful energy. And then he has his sun conjunct Venus, which is about beauty, art, and enjoyment. And there's a love of aesthetics, a love of beauty. And he says, I found the world completely and totally fantastic as a child. Of course, I had the usual fears like going to school. For me, back then, school was a crime against young people. It destroyed the seeds of liberty. The teachers didn't encourage knowledge or a positive attitude. So, this is very much like Jupiter and Libra and the ascendant kind of energy. And it's like seeing the sense of hope and possibility. Mars and Punarvasu, Saturn and Punarvasu, Jupiter ascendant, and then seeing the sort of innocence of a childlike perspective, which I think also is Jupiter is the guru. And the guru, the one who brings wisdom, it's usually very simple wisdom. And the guru is often like a very old, wise person, but the wisdom of the elders is often very similar to the wisdom of the children. And I think he had that connection, that sort of childlike innocence that he kept through all of his work, through his whole life, I feel. And it also can lead to a sort of righteous or pious energy. But I think because he has it in Libra, it balances it out, where it's like he's not trying to impose his way of being on the world. He is trying to share it. And it's a very humble, like non-attached kind of non-egoic kind of approach, which is really beautiful to see for somebody who reached such sort of status and power and influence, that his work was just like his work, his craft, his art, which is again, he's expressing his guru abilities, Jupiter abilities, wisdom through his art, which is Libra, ruled by Venus, which is with the sun. So he's a natural, standing out leader, creative person. But like he says, school destroyed the seeds of liberty. And Libra is all about liberty. It's all about balance and the scales of justice. And Jupiter being there, he has the sense, a sense of sort of authority, a sense of sort of clarity of like what liberty is, what balance is, what fairness is, what innocence is, what authenticity is. And he stayed true to that when he could have like sold out so many times in his career. He could have like compromised his vision. He could have been more of a commercial artist, but he did a lot of stuff like way outside the box, oftentimes ahead of the curve of artists, and doing things like digital video when everyone was saying digital was like fake or not good and everyone should only do film. And so he has this way of like staying in touch with his wisdom and innocence and truth, and doing that and doing what's right for him without compromising too much. And that shows up all the way back to his childhood. He talks about going out as an adult and having his first child, and he has a child, and it was a bit scary for him, uncomfortable for him. And I think that is where Sun is in Capricorn. That's considered a great enemy placement. So it's the second worst place the Sun can be. But we like to focus on what is the possible positive expression. And that's a great ability to be disciplined, consistent. And that's what he shows in his meditation practice, in his work, in his consistency over his career. But I think this is part of what plays into his difficulty becoming a father. And the movie Eraserhead, at least my interpretation of it to some degree, is him artistically, symbolically expressing what it felt like for him to become a father. Now, there's a lot of interpretations. I could be wrong. I think he might have said this in an interview somewhere that there was some element to that, but he also has said that nobody understood that movie. So I don't think I'm going to be the one to break that. But he talks about this a lot. And he says when he became an adult and got his own place and had a baby and all this, he said, we lived cheap and the city was full of fear. A kid was shot down the street. We were robbed twice. We had windows shot out, a car stolen. The house was first broken into only 3 days after we moved in. The feeling was so close to extreme danger, and the fear was so intense. There was violence and hate and filth, but the biggest influence in my whole life was that city, which was Philadelphia, where he stayed as he was growing up, as becoming an adult. But also to become a successful filmmaker outside of LA and Los Angeles and the Hollywood sort of machine also is a big testament to his work ethic and his consistency and his determination to share his art with the world before eventually moving over to LA later in life. But starting in Philadelphia, that is what really shaped his expression. And we look at things like the home and like difficulties in the home. That's going to be the fourth house. So again, Sun being in the great enemy sign of the fourth house, there's going to be some conflict in the home, some challenges with the role of the home and all this. And he has the uh, the fifth house of children is Aquarius, ruled by Saturn. So whenever you have a Saturn influence over the fifth house, there's a greater likelihood of having children because children are a great service and responsibility, which is what Saturn is all about. It teaches humility and service. So having Aquarius in the fifth house, which is ruled by Saturn for him, and Saturn in Gemini, which is another child indicating sign, is a good indicator of having children. And then that's ruled by Mercury, which is with K2. K2 also happens to be another indicator of children, also Mercury. And then his moon is aspecting his fifth house. So there's a lot of things pointing to his fifth house being activated with the child energy. And that's not just through a physical baby that is born, but also through his creative expression and published work that he maintains this childlike kind of attitude. And Aquarius, of course, is the very eccentric, unique sign to have in the fifth house. So his artistic expression, his creative output is going to be very unique and eccentric and individualistic, like his own unique way of doing things. But the extreme danger in the home and all of this, obviously, it wasn't the case through his whole life, but it was the case during that time in his life. And that would have been when he was going through his Venus dasha and Sun dasha, having been born in his Ketu dasha. So when you're born in the, especially the Ketu or Rahu dasha, there's an element of danger and risk in early life and early childhood and change in a sort of intense way. So it's sort of a familiarity, a comfort almost with these kind of intense things that can come up with being born in a Ketu or Rahu dasha. But he did have a very safe childhood to begin with. He says he just moved to this neighborhood because it was so cheap as an adult and because he had a baby coming and all this. So he just chose a cheap neighborhood, but it happened to be a very dangerous neighborhood. And it was also because he wanted to go to this Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. So he was following his passion, his pursuit of his dream, but making this compromise in that way. And that's part of the sun in Capricorn as well. It's like to be the leader, to be empowered, to be in your creativity. There are some difficult circumstances around the structures of your life that you have to deal with at times. And that was sun in Capricorn for him. And I think later in life, it was more to do with uh, the sort of Hollywood system or this sort of traditional storytelling model that he struggled to fit in and still be himself and still be authentic and still be able to market his movies. And there's a lot of issues with things like that of him being on the verge of success throughout the 90s, but difficulty in like how to actually market his movies and reach the bigger audience that he was so close to, but still maintaining his integrity. And I think that's part of the sun in Capricorn too. Capricorn imposes restrictions. The sun just wants to lead and just do what it needs to do. So there's a bit of a conflict there. But I think he made the most of that as well. So continuing on a little further down in his story, uh, he said 1990 was the year that he had his big success with winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes Film Festival and the TV series Twin Peaks being a big hit on TV and a musical piece as well coming out. So he had quite a powerful year in 1990 and even collaborated with Michael Jackson for his Dangerous tour as well. So 1990 began his Rahu Dasha had just started right before that. So 1989, September 1989, he began his Rahu Dasha, and that carried him all the way to 2007. So that range, like 1989 to 2007, was basically his peak of his work. And Rahu is where we all have this like strong drive and infinite energy. And it's in Gemini, which is very creative. And Mrigashira, the deer energy, has a lot of ideas. And what about this? What about that? It's like an infinitely creative energy. So pretty much the bulk of his body of work came out during that time, outside of what is also maybe very well known for his Eraserhead in the 77. But 1989 to 2007, this range of his Rahu Dasha, big success, and it activates Rahu in Gemini and Mrigashira in the ninth house, which has to do with more travel, more sharing your philosophies and values with the world. I think he really brought out the best of his Saturn placement there with Rahu by meditating daily and getting into the spiritual path. And all the potential big issues that are in his chart, I think the meditation helped tremendously. And then just being hardworking helped tremendously. And then also being uncompromising in his vision and artistry and creativity is a big part of his success as well. So he's a great inspiration in that way. Whether you're into his work or not, we can see that beautiful expression of his gifts and his chart in this way. Other thing I haven't mentioned here is Jupiter in the ascendant is in Chitra. Chitra is the architect. And people who have strong Chitra placements like this, like ascendant Chitra, moon Chitra, Jupiter in the first house Chitra, this is great. That is the ability to architect a whole unique world. Sometimes people might describe Chitra people as like living in their own world, but that's not necessarily bad. It's a very unique vision, a unique direction. It's a very creative energy. It's like they build up this whole body of work and this whole way of seeing things and this whole vision. And that is part of his visionary expression, which he also has ascendant in Vishaka, which can be considered a visionary energy. But Vishaka is a very determined energy. And I think that plays through his hardworking nature and getting into like this very dangerous neighborhood where so many bad things could have happened. He could have given up. He could have gone down so many directions there in his early years, but he stayed very focused on his direction. And people with Vishaka placements tend to be very good at achieving goals, very direct, very pointed. And these are both in Libra. So we think of Libra as compromising, balancing, harmonizing, and that's true. But when we get to nakshatras, we get to be very specific. So Chitra, Jupiter, and Vishaka, ascendant, are both in Libra and both very different energies. So Chitra is, again, the architect. So, and Jupiter is the protector and very benevolent energy. So he had a lot of support to create his vision and stick with it. And Vishaka, a lot of drive, no matter what, to follow through on it. And then to go through his Rahu Dasha at what is often also, anyways, the peak of the work life, around like 20s to 50s, like in that range where we're all in our sort of peak working years. He had his Rahu Dasha during that range. So that whenever you go through Rahu Dasha in that range, it just amplifies, but that's a lot of fuel to the fire of whatever else you got going on. Could be good or bad. But in his case, I think he learned to harness his energy, to focus his direction in life and his energies, to have that meditation practice was very beneficial for him. And to just keep busy and keep working. The Rahu Dasha, you just basically got to keep busy and keep working. And yes, there's going to be ups and downs and setbacks. And of course, he experienced that. But I think that time he really harnessed that energy for its strengths. So I'll leave it at that for today. There's so much more I could say. I could talk for hours about his chart or any chart, but I just wanted to take this time today to celebrate the life of David Lynch and somebody who's been very influential and inspiring to me and to many others. And whether you're aware of his work or not, or into it or not, hopefully this episode also helped you just understand how you can see people's gifts in their birth chart and see some of his gifts and how they expressed, and maybe for yourself or for others, how these gifts could express. One more thing, I see, Sun and Venus in Uttara Shada. That's also a very hardworking, determined energy. So having Sun and Venus in Uttara Shada fits very much well with his uncompromising artistic vision. I wanted to make sure I touched on that one as well. So people who have that are going to be great artists and very hardworking and determined as well. If you want to look at your chart with me, go to quietmindastrology.com. You can schedule a one-to-one reading, and every chart's different. And, everything I'm saying is based on looking at patterns and observing people just like this. We're looking through somebody's life and their gifts and their strengths and their contributions to the world. And we see how that plays out through these archetypal energies. And when you see the pattern enough times, it's very helpful to see that pattern and then be able to predict when you see it again. So that's what I like to do and like to share with you, and hope you find it helpful today. And look forward to sharing more with you next time on the Quiet Mind Astrology podcast.